Imagine a man in the 19th century, walking alone through the Swiss Alps, wrestling not with enemies, but with thoughts, radical, volcanic thoughts about the nature of the mind, the roots of human behavior, and the lies we tell ourselves to feel sane. Long before Sigmund Freud mapped out the unconscious or Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, Friedrich Nietzsche was already digging deep into the human psyche. Without the luxury of a clinical lab, a DSM manual, or even acceptance by his peers. What if I told you that many of modern psychology's most groundbreaking ideas, like cognitive dissonance, repression, the will to meaning, and even trauma, were foreshadowed by a solitary German philosopher whose works were dismissed as madness in his lifetime? This isn't just a story about a philosopher. It's a revelation about how one man's descent into the depths of human experience predicted an entire field of science, one that continues to shape how we understand ourselves today. Welcome to the unfolding journey. On this channel, we explore the intersections of philosophy, psychology, and personal growth, tracing timeless ideas that continue to shape our modern world. If you're passionate about the inner workings of the human mind, ancient wisdom, or the kind of deep thought that changes how you see the world, you're in the right place. Now, let's unfold one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of thought: how Friedrich Nietzsche anticipated modern psychology. Nietzsche's psychology before psychology. Nietzsche was not a psychologist by training. He was a philologist, a scholar of ancient texts. But his philosophical works are permeated with an uncanny psychological insight. He questioned not just what we think, but why we think it. What motivates belief? What drives morality? What lies beneath the surface of reason and virtue? Before Freud would popularize the unconscious mind, Nietzsche was already uncovering hidden motives. In On the Genealogy of Morality, he didn't just analyze moral values. He deconstructed them, asking what psychological needs gave rise to concepts like guilt, sin, and conscience. He didn't believe humans were rational creatures who sometimes behave irrationally. Rather, he thought irrationality was the default, and our so-called rationality was often just a cover story for deeper, darker drives. Where psychology would eventually explore neuroses and internal conflicts, Nietzsche spoke of a fragmented self, an internal battlefield of competing instincts, desires, and wills. The will to power and the roots of motivation. One of Nietzsche's most controversial and profound psychological contributions is the concept of the will to power. While Freud later described human behavior as driven by the libido or the will to pleasure, and Viktor Frankl suggested a will to meaning, Nietzsche believed the deepest human drive was not survival or pleasure, but power. This wasn't about political domination. It was about mastery, self-overcoming, and the need to assert one's identity and significance in the world. Modern psychology has explored similar ideas in theories of self-determination, motivation, and the need for autonomy and competence. Abraham Maslow, famous for his hierarchy of needs, placed self-actualization, becoming the fullest version of oneself, at the top of the pyramid. That echoes Nietzsche's ideal of the Übermensch, the individual who transcends herd morality and shapes life as a creative act. Nietzsche saw people not as passive receivers of meaning, but as creators of value, a theme that strongly influenced existential psychology in the 20th century. The birth of cognitive dissonance. Long before Leon Festinger coined the term cognitive dissonance in 1957, Nietzsche had already exposed the tension between belief and reality in the human mind. He argued that people adopt moral and religious systems not because they are objectively true, but because they serve psychological needs, particularly the need to rationalize suffering or justify weakness. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche famously wrote, "We have art so that we do not die of the truth." This line captures his insight into how people construct illusions to cope with harsh realities, a cornerstone idea in cognitive psychology today. For Nietzsche, dissonance wasn't an exception, it was the human condition. He believed that confronting the truth often led to existential crisis, which is why people cling to comforting lies. The gap between who we are and who we pretend to be, Nietzsche argued, causes internal friction that only honest self-examination can resolve. This same idea is now explored in therapy rooms worldwide under names like shadow work, inner child integration, and radical acceptance. Repression, trauma, and the inner wound. Nietzsche didn't speak in clinical terms, but his understanding of repression is remarkable. In On the Genealogy of Morality, he describes how instincts once expressed outward, aggression, desire, rage, became internalized in civilized society. These repressed instincts turned inward become guilt, shame, and self-punishment. This anticipates Freud's theory of repression and the idea that unexpressed drives can manifest as neuroses. Nietzsche understood that the psyche bears scars, what we'd now call trauma, not from physical wounds, but from unresolved emotional and existential conflicts. He also saw how this inner wound could be passed down culturally, especially through religion. Christianity, he argued, moralized suffering and glorified meekness, turning it into a virtue. This, he believed, created generations of people afraid of their own power, shamed for their instincts, and dependent on external validation. Modern trauma theory similarly recognizes how intergenerational trauma and belief systems shape mental health. Nietzsche was, in effect, a trauma theorist without using the term. The shadow and the masks we wear. Carl Jung is often credited with the concept of the shadow self, the parts of ourselves we deny or reject, but Nietzsche foreshadowed this long before. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he warns that those who fight monsters must be careful not to become monsters themselves. He spoke often of the dangers of denying one's darker impulses, noting that what we repress doesn't disappear. It comes back in distorted forms. Nietzsche believed that people wear masks, social personas that hide our true selves. He argued that we construct these masks to fit societal norms, religious expectations, or roles we've been given. But beneath these masks lies a chaotic, untamed core, a force he called the Dionysian. Modern psychology explores similar ideas through the concept of persona in Jungian theory, or false self versus true self in humanistic psychology. Nietzsche's message? If we want to grow, we must confront, not conceal, our shadow. Eternal recurrence and the thought experiment of the self. One of Nietzsche's most psychologically profound ideas is the concept of eternal recurrence. The idea that you must live your life as if you would have to live it over and over, exactly the same, for all eternity. This is more than a metaphysical speculation. It's a psychological mirror. It forces you to ask, am I living a life I'd want to repeat forever? This thought experiment anticipates modern techniques in existential therapy and values-based living. Today, psychologists ask clients to imagine being at the end of their lives and looking back. Would they be proud of how they lived? What regrets would they have? Nietzsche was asking these questions in the 1880s. He believed that embracing the eternal recurrence was the path to affirming life, not avoiding pain, but accepting it as part of the beauty of existence. Nihilism and the crisis of meaning. Nietzsche famously declared, God is dead. But what he really meant was that the old foundations of meaning, religion, tradition, absolute morality, had crumbled. The modern world, he warned, would face a crisis of meaning. This prediction has come true in many ways. Today, psychologists and thinkers discuss the rise of anxiety, depression, and disconnection as symptoms of a meaning vacuum in the modern world. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, framed therapy around the idea that lack of meaning is the root of much psychological suffering. Nietzsche saw this coming. He knew that when old values fall, people don't automatically find new ones. They drift, fall into nihilism, or seek escape in distractions. His challenge was not to despair, but to create, to forge meaning as an act of personal courage. Self-overcoming, Nietzsche's psychology of growth. Perhaps Nietzsche's greatest psychological insight is the idea of self-overcoming. He didn't believe in static identities or fixed diagnoses. He believed the self is something we must continually transcend. This aligns powerfully with modern positive psychology and growth mindset theory. Where some models of psychology focus on dysfunction, Nietzsche emphasized transformation, becoming more than what we were. He didn't offer comforting answers. He offered difficult questions, but he believed deeply in the human capacity for renewal, creativity, and evolution. Not in spite of suffering, but because of it. Friedrich Nietzsche died in obscurity, dismissed as mad, and largely ignored by his academic peers. But his psychological genius has outlived him. Today, his insights echo through the halls of therapy offices, philosophy seminars, and neuroscience labs. He anticipated the unconscious, the shadow, repression, trauma, the search for meaning, and the battle between truth and illusion, decades before these became central to psychology. Nietzsche wasn't just a philosopher. He was a psychologist ahead of his time. And if we dare to read him not just with the mind, but with the heart, we begin to see not a man lost in madness, but a visionary who saw more deeply into the human soul than most ever will. If this exploration moved you, challenged you, or opened new ways of thinking, don't forget to subscribe to The Unfolding Journey. We're just getting started. From ancient wisdom to modern psychology, from existential thought to personal transformation, there's so much more to unfold together. So hit that subscribe button, leave a comment sharing your favorite Nietzsche insight, and keep questioning the story you've been told about yourself. Until next time, keep unfolding.